That's it.
Recording in progress.
Yeah, la setene yang. Yang ti julama nanola. Cheta tsibi dawala ramje phewatar. Degin sala hyonamji chujikoya. Jongzen tongse.
So there's another quote from the Uttara Tantra that says, just like the waxing moon becomes ever and ever more clear as you you will also gradually gain a vision of the Dharmakaya. So that is in the Uttara Tantra, a verse which is explaining the way that the progression of the path will be experienced. So what that example is that in the lunar calendar, from the first day of the month through the 15th, the moon is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger until on the 15th you see the entire moon. It's the full moon. And so for a bodhisattva who is practicing the path, then they will gradually see the Dharmakaya similarly to the way that you'll see the moon, like it greater and greater vision of it. And so the way that we will see that is that right now our practice of emptiness or our experience of luminosity is still what we would call a conceptual practice, or a conceptual, it's still using that aspect of the meaning generality. Like I said, it's still kind of an idea of something appearing in your mind. And so it is like that way that we're practicing right now, based on kind of an intellectual understanding. And so by practicing that, we gradually move forward and start gaining more experience. And even though it is still conceptual, it still counts as like a legitimate meditation on emptiness.
다 던지대 갈리 ngüda 제니 차 로기어다 베나 치농가 다비 좀년데 아니 갈리 다와 ngüda 야페 녀 차도바나 이제니 로기어레사.
And so that meaning generality or that intellectual or conceptual vision becomes closer and closer and closer to reality, to the actual vision of reality. And it's kind of like starting off with seeing a reflection of the moon and then gradually getting closer and closer to seeing the actual moon.
아니 다 반섬 찔라더니 다 사다오다 배는 사당부 나오지 라운드가 돈이데 원섬 통도 다 원섬 통도 되니 배는 치바 당부 그 다와나기 배 충충요래 이나야 다코 다와랑레다 되고 배 충충진 통고다 다와랑레.
And so at a certain point, and in Dharma terms we say this is the first bodhisattva level or bodhisattva bhumi. At that point, one first sees the actual reality, like directly. And so that is like on the first day of the new moon when you're seeing a very small sliver of the moon, but it is the actual moon. It's no longer just the reflection image of the moon. You're actually seeing the moon directly.
that that delete da sam ge da wasar sen da sam ge chuni sen da ka chen de da jing tong gu yore da de ji tong gu yore ngo som da re ina ya ngo som la ya chi par yore song da pe de ngo som la de ne di chi ba ji ge da wa de ya da wa re kyong ga ge da wa de ya da wa re da wa yin ba ji ina yang de ne sarvata jipata zupi chojigoni tatile chepa yore sonye sarva yade.
And so this experience, even though it is like small or you could say partial, it is actual reality, the real nature or reality of your mind, or we can say luminosity of your mind. And it is a direct experience of that, but there's a difference between the direct experience that you have initially and the full measure of that. So just in the same way that there's a difference between the small sliver of the moon that you see, even though it is the actual moon, and seeing the full moon on the 15th. And so the difference is described in terms of the extent of the clarity, the vastness, and the, you could say, like completeness of your vision of reality.
아니 근데 진이 제체로도더니 타마 다 쫑이 다와데 다 다와 용수 좁아지 됐다.
And so gradually, you're starting by only seeing the small sliver of the moon, and you, on the 15th, then see the entirety of the moon completely and perfectly.
Jidana tsamshi ni dawa ngu tsipa chegi dawa ni yandruwa rawa de ta nga suge tani tsanchub simbasima namdi lamdru tong di tani rabati rodi kiyorse.
And so the timeless awareness or the luminous wisdom mind of the Buddha is like the moon on the 15th. And our practice starts off with just having kind of an image, kind of like a reflected image or a reflection of the moon. And gradually we move into seeing a sliver of the moon, and then we start to see more and more and more of the moon, like that. And so that's the way a practitioner, like a bodhisattva practitioner, will gradually gain experience, gain realization of this reality.
De madu dawa yenda mepa rewe sena kapte di yore sere ta dawa yongsu zobaji yore sere ina yang tongso je wangde tongni ane nga so chung ji le tongku yo mare se.
So even on that first day of the new moon, that sliver of the moon, we're only seeing a little tiny piece of the moon. But at that time, it's not as if the rest of the moon doesn't exist. It's still there. It's just that our vision of it is limited.
Jongege dawa tang jege dawa ning de la
And so there's no difference from the perspective of the moon itself on the first day of the month or the 15th of the month. There's only a difference in the way an individual is able to see it. And so the that Buddha nature is like the 15th, the moon on the 15th, the full moon, which has all of the qualities of Buddhahood completely perfect, even within us. Although we right now are not able to instantaneously, all at once, reveal or have all of that perfectly manifest to us. But those qualities are perfectly there, even now. So in that text, then in the teachings on this, then it uses this example of the moon, the increasing vision of the moon from the 1st to the 15th to describe or to exemplify, you could say, the traversing of the paths of bodhisattva practice in terms of the increasing experience of luminosity. So it's really important to know, for a practitioner to know, that the deeper one goes in terms of their practice, then the more and more and more vast or extensive their experience or their vision of luminosity will become.
In a digitini conchusam gata kaseri tobia regdauti teni dehin would hear the hood naso tata conchusam de mahiveche and a reg to mahido yore.
And so at this point, generally, it would be good and appropriate to understand exactly what is the Buddha and be able to identify what is the Buddha, what is the Dharma, what is the Sangha. And in the Uttara Tantra Shastra, in that text, it talks extensively about the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and from a different perspective, a particular perspective about what that is. But for us, it's better not to get into too much of that. And what we're really talking about here as our primary topic then is that Buddha nature, which is the cause, you could say, for us to be able to become Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha ourselves.
Oh, that's it. And then this whole time that Julama Coreno, she don't know the chain that any Sanji and then take it at the Halemo. You did it. Muni Koranji Sanji Tingaso Namjunta and the Sanji said the Mundajipa Yachini. And it digiti and then the Pa here on Yahora, Tangaso the Jamdron that Domana Hidukala. The Muni does Sanji and then Topano here at the Julama, not a chadi or that.
And so when they talk about in the Uttara Tantra, when it describes the qualities of Buddhahood, it's talking about a really incredible explanation of the qualities of Buddhahood. You know, normally often when we hear about the qualities of a Buddha, we're thinking about a person and like what a great person or what a wise person, something like that. Like when we take refuge vows and we take refuge in the Buddha, often we're talking about some enlightened or wise person. But in the Uttara Tantra, it's describing Buddha as like this ultimate state of wisdom. And so it's a very particular way of talking.
다 지나서 들인데 땜들서라고 제니 아니 지지나 벤 산지라 다 빵도 용수 좀 봐세 되겠다. 빵 세운데 쩌은 차대서 다니 파 간데지니 세여와 똑 세운데 디게 샘고 연대게 차대서 간전다지 약원데 저여와다 직접다 진행이 재미 이시라서 봐 어다 디 용수 조바 찍대다 산지레에세 나서 바지 시야나 아코지 레디긴데 텔란데 히페 망보여레다 고 연대 지지 데지 시용 보여레데 단 너드소나 빵도 나만 일자니 시에도
So just to keep a little bit of a connection, because I said it would be good to talk about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha here, I'll just say a little bit about when we're talking about Buddha, what we're really talking about is someone or a state of mind, you could say, which has completely eliminated all faulty or mistaken states and which has perfected or fully revealed all of its innate qualities, such as some of those innate qualities are like the two levels. There's another way of talking about the two levels of wisdom and knowing everything in its nature versus knowing everything in its variety, and so forth. So anyway, in the Uttara Tantra itself, there are separate sections giving like 8 special qualities of Buddha, 8 special qualities of Dharma, and 8 special qualities of Sangha, and then explanations of each of those.
Da gendula ma yaung de kala tene ripa da droase. Da right se du tongcha li yaung de. Dror se undu kyong chane ya da dror. Nga so langchen da ba no dror se ba da wo. Da drowan da wo tene ridro ripa le ye drowa le ye ridro yo de je da de ba se. Da je dang de rang de da chuning tongcha de je ye. Deegi ju trotsor kangan trotsor no ni chehiendu ta di cherek trodonge de tan kendunsa.
And so then when it talks about Sangha in the Uttara Tantra, it talks about it from 2 perspectives, a perspective of awareness and freedom. And so there are 4 qualities of awareness and 4 qualities of freedom given. So basically it's talking about in awareness, it's like some realization. And when you realize something, you become free from something. The mistaken perception, you could say. So, freedom like langchen de damle tarbanang.
Damle tror sigirwala kon dam de du tinone ya ten trone ta ko.
So just like an example that's given in the text is that like elephants sometimes get stuck in the mud. So they're like bound, they're like stuck. And then when they're liberated, they, are able to free themselves from that sticky situation or that bondage. So anyway, the way that Uttara Tantra describes Sangha is anyone who has some level, to some degree, the qualities of awareness and freedom.
Tene lam del kaze ngolam yela jeda ngopa kaze
Saminime, karisa.
saminime to me ba ta sanima tsuni denin cheni jende chi rwana
No.
jede lam la ngolam yela jede rwa
Rivela.
That is a jende taso.
We're both debating about what the root verse from the Uttara Tantra is.
They are getting to need some many men to me, but I send him to they need to need the chew. Better go jet another. The package at ten mother was somebody said.
Unless we look it up, I don't think I'm going to remember this line.
No, here.
Okay. Tadi sanjire.
Sanji udane gendenche ti udane chuse mare.
Rela. Timi yeshi wasa nanga mi patla mare. Oh.
Ngolam yana.
Kanshi thoma watame. Mare. Samenime tomepa dakse nimbo chonigi ganshi gangi chadawa deni tsini chinde chuse.
Deni chinde chuse dao.
네. 사메님의 또메바.
사메님의 또메바 다슬
님보 촌이기. Ganshi gangi chatawa.
Ganshi gangi chatawa. Deni
Deni choose.
Chadra ni는 고과당 람지 데마온 고람 다 대가라래도 고람이라 제dense.
Okay.
다 대체온데 당 고람이라 제dense. 다 고과 다 람세 등인데 고과다 람세. 고과세 온데 가세 레레긴 리버트 서지고니. 다 가세 녀몽도서 막 가세 현이 아니 가세 리버 차니야. 람세 등인데 녀비 촌이야. 같이 녀보다 들어와. 녀보레레다 들어와레레기 고니. 아니 취디야도 그래서.
So the way that they talk about dharma then is in terms of cessation and a path. So the same terms that we used in the Four Noble Truths. We have a state of freedom, kind of, or a state of cessation, and a path that leads to that. So it's talked about in terms of, like, if you were to overcome some antidote, or some faulty state, or some diluted state, then you will, in the cessation of that, you'll gain some qualities. And then, so Dharma is talked about in terms of the attainment. That means like the cessation of something faulty, as well as the thing that caused that cessation, the antidote. So like the thing that you were practicing, or the state of mind that led to overcoming the faulty state. So it's both the state of being separated or ceasing, or that afflictive state ceasing, as well as the state of mind which led to overcoming that mistaken perception.
나 근데 송단당 가서 들라 박사님 보고 세다 람데 그 람데라 다 디데이 세징 가서 고야 같이 못하래 박사 세대 다 베나지 다당 가서 들이 진이 그 곰짱운데 갈라베 샘게 노네다지 녀몽라서 받아서 다니 파다 이 희근 나와데 가세 되지 썰나 이 희근 나와데 썰봐 될라더니 차당 몽성을 들바돼서 봐 닦아 이 희근 나와돼서 봐 썰봐 다 저어디 닦선 되기 때문에 다 녀보소로 걸어봤고 방자에서 좀야돼서 상마디 녀보소로 요래서.
And there's an important line in this where it says that the antidote is the antidote which is pure and clear, or pure and luminous, you could say. So pure means that antidote removes or purifies or removes, you could say, the afflictions of attachment, aversion, stupidity, and so forth. And then as those are removed, then the appearance or the experience of primordial wisdom or timeless awareness becomes more and more clear or luminous.
And there is something 공가서 곰 뜻이 통통 이마도 잡마타나 빼 되네 가세래 대랑아서 남도다 직 녀몽다오다 근데 뭐고 냐데 냐베니베테 마인 받잖아 빼 되네디 샘데 박바 되네 대암베데고 사보 마도 마지 니코딩에 드립딩에서도 다 박바데서라다 대짜네 용구요 말아봐 돼서 대체운데 랑고 차데라 다 가서라다 디 진튠데디 공고 그러세.
So when we're meditating, to think back on these terms, it's important that when we're meditating that our mind is becoming or is in a state or is becoming in a state which is becoming purified of these afflictive mental states. And in the absence of them, or in that state where they are purified, that there is becoming more and more clarity or illumination in your experience. And so, of course, for like these like noble beings or like bodhisattvas who have had a direct experience of reality, then they don't have that dullness or sleepiness of meditation. But when we say like purity and clarity, or purity and illumination, it's not only an absence of afflictions, but also an absence of like dullness and sleepiness, but that there should be like this illumination or wakefulness, clarity of mind.
And
one really important thing when we say dharma or we say the word path, a path is a state of mind.
다리 지당다 고추선데 단델렌데 히 당부 디바티cap 지만 지바티cap 쇼 이 차옹거리다 다리 가서지 디 잡지람 저놈이잖아 이 브라충종야 브라세 쳔보야 브라세 나기 다지다 고추선데 같이 디바지 시에데 땜다 야고르바스.
And so, if we were to go into the actual text, then it gives a verse of summary, like for example, about each of the 3 jewels, and then an extensive explanation, and then a verse of summation for each one. And here we only touched on it a little bit, because I mentioned it, and I wanted to not leave that absent. I wanted to make that connection because we already talked about it. And Rabjam Rinpoche, Shechen Rabjam Rinpoche, he says, even a small little candy is still a candy. Like, even I only give you a little touch, it still was an explanation of the 3 jewels, even if it's not a huge explanation.
Let's say, and dig it out, I think also the recom day, and it bet
So I have now covered, a small portion or a small explanation, you could say, of this Buddha element or Buddha nature.
And there's it. And it hung the Jid Valada days at the Koranda. That's it. Topado, Mount Bala Yungsa, Nosanda. Then they telling a chick, the joke and a mashuga inside.
And so now, as part of a kind of concluding section, I want to talk about some things that I think could come up for you subsequent to this teaching. Some doubts or even mistaken kind of ideas that could come up in the wake of this teaching.
Anita Jomden dig and dig it in here. That the way he what they down the Galaya. Da Corganone and it topache ya shuni. Then it check it that he devalada the hingbo said the danger down. And it Jagala Dachembo. Then but didn't need the Chipa Chaduk Marave, didn't need the Chipacariore, Yaji Huyore.
So when the Buddha had given the teachings on the Buddha nature in his retinue of students, there was a student who asked, he said, so this Buddha nature that you have taught seems very similar to what in some other Indian teachers, at the time of the Buddha, teach as that they call the great Maha-Atman, like the great self. So what's the difference? So someone asked the Buddha that.
And this on the autumn then they get date and it didn't drag Maria somebody. That date and in the Mandavi Jim Senda day, then da Chambo taking all day, then da Namta goes some chin of a date, Kokali Chagre, Ina, that more Tomba Chani, more Tomba Day Marias. Nasugi Tata the Hindi, the Nekase. Ngo Koram, but then the Tombicha, that Namta goes some sit that Jimachi they go de, be young degree. Then this song that Namta goes something more on the day or the Tinitavan in Dragmaris.
And so the Buddha said that these are not the same thing. They are not similar. And the reason they're not similar is first, there's a teaching called the 3 Gates of Liberation. And later you should look into that maybe, or maybe you'll hear about it later. But anyway, the first of those is that the essence of everything is emptiness. And so in those non-Buddhist schools, they never say that the great self is empty or is emptiness. But the Buddha nature, this timeless awareness of Buddha nature is essentially, or is its essence, its nature is emptiness.
And then the song that the relative part Jandrona, and Chironso, there's some quantum lure. Madame is a Dutch imposing it the Richie and the Hinibon the Richie race in a region, the head of Chugade, Dechi Goyachi, Tonkomado. And dot the sona, Nasu same girl, that the Hinibosing in the same Rangin Jiligaso. Rangin City town, the Rangin de da, Gachi, Mowo, the name, Tombani. Tombani la, Tombani li, Tombani get Sarli, and a carina Jekun Charong Yunge. Then did some Matu Jiggy, Telly Pagilata, Cassidy Dodunda Wuchi, Mubonda Wuchi, Tanyege Koronji, Naso did not do Yot Chubana Wuchi. Tani Yak Yomare, Dig Chepachati. One thing also the same wall, Setagoda Matu, Yentasa Yomare was.
And so we could get further into that discussion, but I think it would just cause more confusion to go in and talk about each and every one of the distinctions that are made in some of these teachings between this non-Buddhist idea of the great self and the Buddhist idea of Buddha nature. But I think it would probably just cause more confusion if I went point by point explaining that. So to summarize, the idea is, or the point is, that the Buddha nature is described as the actual nature of your own mind. And when you look at that nature, you find that its essence or its nature is emptiness. And from the, like we were talking about, that emptiness is form, form is emptiness, form is back and forth way. So from the power, or you could say the energy of emptiness or the openness of emptiness, that nature of mind can appear in any way. And so other than that, there isn't some kind of thing that you can point to as Buddha nature that is some solid, truly existing thing that you could see with your eyes or think of with your conceptual mind. It is essentially, or it is empty in its essence, meaning it's not some kind of solid, singular, truly existing thing.
딱빈 탈이 들어서 라인 사와 칩이 멀리 가서 뭐 동바 딱빈 탈이 라인 사와 칩이 멀리 다 같이 뭐 동바 되게 아니까지 딱바게 되는 탈이 저그래 송 땅에서 배산나 거나 쳤다니다 우마가서베 가세다바 제제네다 콘타 준니다다 가세 파기 라야메 바다고 모똥바데 차디갈라 니기드네 딱바 임비게 탈이 런런이 마도 다른 딱바 제지 파기를 니기 말해 다치모나이.
And so Mipa Rinpoche, there's a aspiration prayer, and in that
야바 뎀바 덴디게 탈라자니 디칼 니야 코요 말이세.
Says that because the essence is empty, or because they are essentially empty, because it is essentially empty, it's beyond the extreme of permanence, or beyond the extreme of existence, or beyond the extreme of some kind of supposed belief in true reality or true existence. That, no matter how much you examine things, you never find some kind of solid, truly existing, permanent, sustaining, ongoing thing. And so that is what, in those non-Buddhist schools that talk about this great self, they say that it's permanent, it's eternal, it's unchanging, it's this, like that. So that's the other big, or that's the main distinction there.
아니 다 딱바다 인사 말이지 다더니 체바 찬도 말해 왜세나 체바 차고 말지 랑인 싸와디요들이 에세다.
And so you might think, okay, well, if it's not permanent, or if it doesn't really or truly exist, then maybe it's non-existent. But that's also not the case, because even though it is empty in essence, it is naturally luminous. It is in its nature, or you could say its essence is emptiness, but its nature is to illuminate or to be illuminated.
랑인사와 칩이 코 트라니 다 코페 첸탈리 드로니 가서 체요 말에 코페 낭차데 고메데 여데라다 디지 온드가라 칩이 탈lungu요 말에서.
And so by its essence of emptiness, it is free from the extreme of, you could say, existence. And from its natural luminosity, it's free from the extreme of non-existence, or of nihilism, or nothingness. Because the appearing aspect, or the luminous aspect, is still there. So therefore, it's beyond either of these kinds of dualistic extremes or sides that you might try to attribute it to.
다니 다지 톡지 군첩 세운데 다 된다고 semchen 탐지기 줄라 고 바지 아 가세레 다제 샘게 다다지 베네 이히 엔체니 zonde 다지 레가지 도와 어다 대손다고 참마다 다지 샘이 여세기 따이나야 다 된다고 되니 요래 참되어래서.
And so then, therefore, it's not like this great self. It isn't a permanent thing. It is beyond the extremes of permanence and annihilation, or permanence and nihilism, or true existence and nihilism. So it has the essence of emptiness, natural clarity or luminosity, and an innate responsiveness that's all pervasive, meaning that it knows things, it can engage things. And those qualities are present within the minds of all beings.
Oh, that the songs danga soga kochi yinglo chetawa yinde tela papa na yin tini gomdu du ane ko langa tegarang la pa labdu yore the songs ani te chi tambo te songa su ya ha ko chi gomtong de su chi ani te dam timba gomna ani yi shi ti ma de jo o tin de cha yore sa.
And so first we need to, for ourselves, we need to come to a definitive understanding, or we need to kind of confirm, like, what is that reality? Then we need to receive meditation instructions in that, and then put them into practice. And as we put them in practice, then we will arrive in this state being described here. And so...
That's it. Da nga so pache da jig dring da chitang da tende ji dangi here da tende ji che here na da digdo. And churong so traba da topa kare yo na and ti doling chen and digdes.
So I think that, like, for what I had to say, that's it. I think that's sufficient. And so I would like for you guys to ask questions. Let's have some discussion.
Long this one but ji da tan do.
Nghe mà thế chị thì chưa làm mà bỏ lỡ là xong mẹ nên đi còn chưa xong để cho đi lỡ là yếu. Thế nên chị thari thori đến cho đỡ ta chị đang ngồi xin chị để xin cho mẹ bị chuyện gì đó xảy ra đó. Chị khai sa.
Great question, Justin.
Yeah, that's on the number draws. Yes.
Yeah, like, so if the goal is this, at least in my experience, there's been some good things that have come from meditating on the things that Khenpo has gone through today, and he's elaborated further on now with the non-self. How does Khen Rinpoche advise, conducting oneself within a culture that seems to be so radically self-bound, or in some cases selfish, and what seems to be a bit narcissistic, to say the least? Because, back to the idea of like the openness or the luminosity of like the young children, we're conditioned within the culture to really, in some cases, be very selfish or even greedy. And so hanging on or continuing to have that sort of openness of non-self and that sort of light of, I don't know, I see it sometimes as creativity or imagination, that it seems to get harder as the years go on. And so how to, to engage others within that system.
Da nga so di chi karse wore da dagme gi don da chi gomyon de deni chi karse wore yapo de du de da nga so gi chi region korang dan chi zo gi chi me korang de zo le an chi me zama de chi pe da kelen ken chang chang wala ane chi nga yus da chi sangura ane nga gi che du da chi nga leka che go gi yus da chi rang dun dru ko da chi shuk che shor wala da wa de. Ani digi nanglo le nga zo chik chopa daw chik ina chik dag mepa rawa chik thone khandre chik drogo re sa da chik mi tsama ge chik nga cho tan mi tsama de chik da yopa de shisha chine chik drogo yo re da nga cho me rawa chik lab yong do nga cho khandre chik do na drogo ge yo sa chi
That's it.
ani pena nga cho bugu chungchu de cho le an chi nga cho labanang sheng ge chik khonzo te semba gu yambo yo re zemba shuk chambo yo ma re ini nga cho khale de lab go ro la khonzo le an chik da so gi dunda drup go re so pesha so go re da chi de semna la chu yon de ne chik be te kom shi da chik thur drog do asa
That's it.
so gi rang do cha bo da chik da rang do da chik drup go ya da chik isa no de cher da chik ting ro da chik kari chik thur da chik drog do asa
That's it. 나, 다 공부대리도 다 너드나 이 추근노는 희용야다 파긴 고요근이 동니다
re
더기요 말이시러라 라세 대나오래 다 아니지
So I want to know from you, like, what do you see that's so like problematic or contradictory in you trying to experience or practice selflessness and everyone else believing in the self, like, or being selfish? Like, what's the problem, or where's the contradiction for you in that, or what's the sticky point?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like well, that's something to think about.
So maybe just think about that a little bit, and let's take another question and we can come back around.
Okay.
Yeah. Is there anything in the chat, Rachel?
Yes, there is a question here. Okay, so if I don't have a self, where is this Buddha nature, or who or what has it?
Okay. Da di dag mena. Dene nga di dewarship nimbo kawade yore yang dewarship nimbo di sula yore sa.
dewarship nimbo de dene semje rangin revas.
So Buddha nature is the nature of mind, right?
Dichiondu semje yochadu di ngaso semda semge rangin se nge tari tse katone tse de songas. Dichiondu semje yona di rangin jore. Dere ma to yang ti Buddha nature se de yemba ji kasek de la yayo mare se.
And so the other day I talked about how you have your mind, your ordinary mind, but that the actual nature of that mind is the Buddha nature. So it's not as if that there's a you or there's a mind and then there's this other thing called Buddha nature that you somehow possess. It just is the actual nature of your mind.
Same sena ngaso tata di chik ta tamchi chik koreng tongsam yo chadong mongsam yo denge tela tene same se songas.
So we were talking about mind. And we said that mind is something which is clear and aware and knowing. It also can appear as attachment, aversion, or all kinds of thinking.
Dela tegarang rebe onchi tuning dedi dela taroma shiabre samotangya yore da yomari sedi yore seni eni dorevas.
And then I said, is that all there is to mind, or is there something deeper or something more profound to that we could penetrate or that we could go into?
And
so when we went deeper, we talked about this Buddha nature, what we call Buddha nature. So we just need to think about Buddha nature as the actual nature of our mind and not some separate thing, something out there.
There's another question here in the chat. Could Rinpoche just say again the connection between emptiness and the Dharmakaya?
아니 돈번이 단 추크니기 직 드라와 카리오레스 양디 추크기 코르다와 테스티 카리엔다와 직 무슨 나체사
나세 아니 다지 다 추크 세대다 가서 다다디 다 삭바다 드라비 인들라 추크세 저당 대야고서 당가서 나 삭바 다지 녀무스 다 삭바세 다지 취제세 그 말에 다 삭바다 같이 로버와다 탐제의 드라비게 되니 인들라 추크세 맹다데 거레스
아니 키나버시 콘자 다 잉데라 직 동니기 잉다와 지 람나디그베 고츠마 잉세
다 동니기 인다고 지라오래.
And so the Dharmakaya is what we could call the expanse of emptiness. But remember, this is like the emptiness aspect of your mind's nature, something like that. When it is completely separated from all of the temporary or adventitious or faulty states. Does that make sense? Or is that enough? So generally there's a huge explanation that you could give where there's like the 21 factors of the absence of contamination in this basic space, and there's a whole big explanation that could be given about that. So let me give you one kind of example. Like right now, when we meditate on compassion, it's something that we would call contaminated compassion, because our idea of compassion is still mixed with or still affected by our afflictive emotions. It's still like partially afflicted by ordinary desire. And so at a certain point, as we practice that more and more and more, and we practice emptiness more and more and more, we'll get to a point where our experience of compassion is no longer in any way mixed with or contaminated by this dualistic framework or this afflictive emotional states. And we'll have an experience of where our experience of emptiness and compassion are inseparable. And that's described as a quality of Dharmakaya.
Geraldine, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Rinpoche, you remember us that the Buddha nature is not permanent, is nothing permanent, but in the Dzogchen approach, we have also the notion, very important, that the state of Rigpa is very stable, immovable, always present in all the states of samsara, in all the 6 bardos, transcending the 3 times. Mm-hmm. So we have the impression that there is a sense of permanence in that, you know.
Mm-hmm. Dadi kinemshege dan dadi deorshek binimo de takpa maris segurwala. Ini yang anso de Dzogchen ke kap leang chik rikpa de leang yongdrong dawa chik tembo dawa chik leang o chik korwe ne dawa chik le ta kawala yene kadu yene yang chik takpar dene chik ripping ale meyoa dawa chik tani den su jardo urwas ani dela vete tek oni chik bardo druk tang korwa da kawala yene yang de so chik Rikpingang du yoris da chi se da chi ti yungdrung da chi tembo da chi se di then so ta hwa da cha ga men de sa
là sẽ đó là chỉ trong cái đi chỉ đang trở về đó là du la mà không rơi cái nón này thế này cái sẽ tập bắt để mà dùng rong cái chỉ hiện thì hồi bớt ta hiện chính cái đó chỉ đi coi là thế này test nó lại cho nên thích sẽ sẽ đó.
So those same words are even used in the Uttara Tantra. So I'm going to answer you from that perspective, the unchanging, stable, and so forth. That type of language is even used about Buddha nature in the Uttara Tantra.
Ta di che tang ge nga so nam ju ge ta pa se ding de ju la ma no ne ta pa se ding de main dari ma tu ta da ta ni dag ma se.
So there is even an expression, a way of talking about a kind of permanence, you could say, in the Uttara Tantra, but it's not at all our ordinary way of talking about permanence.
Ta ne ta ri ka se ta pa se ding de. Chu ga hi pa ge le ye de la njo ba sa wa ni me ju de la. Ta pa se de ding a so de nam ju ta ma ta pa ma de se de go.
So when we normally talk about permanence, what we're talking about is assuming that an object or a thing, whatever, it exists, it's real, and then that real thing is permanent and unchanging. That's what we normally mean by permanence.
Ju la ma no ni ta pa se de ti tin de wi ge pa ge la na ka se chi chu chen ngo chi pa ya chi ni. De ga rong la de ni din jo a me pa ti ya ge ma re. Ka se di yen den tam chi ye ni lun zu gi bi cha ni. Ko de ye sem chen ji ni gam na de ye de ba sa ji sa na de ye lam zang sai sa na ya de ga rong de che ngon de ju bi che ba zam ma do. De ni yen den la pen de me bi cha ni ta pa se la de ina ngo tong ba ra ye sa ba din ro go de de chi un du ta pa da nga ma de de ni za nin da ki yo ma se.
그래서 담보 취징 자도 요마로.
네, 그 주제 거라 너무 뭐 동바라 이사와 근데 짠이 거로 따마다 될 된다고 깨자 짠이 희야 거로요 말이에요.
So the way that it's talked about in Uttara Tantra is that from the very beginning you're not talking about something that phenomenally or on an ordinary level is considered to exist. From the very beginning its nature is emptiness. So it, like when we say exist, we're already into the realm of like fixating on it being something at the expense of being something else. Like you're already falling into an extreme. So we're not even, from the very beginning, when we say that all of these qualities of that the Buddha nature is there in beings, that all these qualities are primordially present, that those qualities are there and equally there at the time of an ordinary being, at the time of a fully enlightened Buddha, or even at the time of the practice of the path of a bodhisattva, that those qualities don't increase or decrease throughout that time. But we're not even starting from the beginning by saying that those qualities truly exist. So like our ordinary talk or discussion of permanence versus impermanence is already working on the ordinary phenomenal level of assuming something really exists, and then on the basis of that talking about whether it's changing or unchanging. And this perspective of Uttara Tantra is already starting from a perspective where this Buddha nature is the nature of emptiness. So it's essentially empty, naturally luminous, and so forth. So it's an entirely different way of talking about that.
In fact, I was asking my question, from the perspective of the Dzogchen practice, when we have been introduced to Rigpa, then all our Dzogchen path is based on this Rigpa, who is unchangeable all over, in all states of the 6 bardos, of night and day. This Rigpa that we have recognized, even though it's, of course, the union of emptiness and clarity, of course, but in the sense that it is always there, always present, unchanging, there is this sense of permanence, permanence.
Yeah, I think that the distinction that we're making is that when we say permanence, in the ordinary sense, and in the sense of like when we say permanence, when they were talking about the permanence of the self or the permanence of the great self, you're already starting in that discussion of permanence by saying that something exists. And here, in Dzogchen or here, they wouldn't say that Buddha nature or Rigpa exists. It's beyond the ideas of existence, non-existence, both, neither, all conceptual elaborations. So there's no discussion of permanence. Even though,
But the question is not if Rigpa exists or not, but there is this characteristic of Rigpa that is always present and unchanging in the experience, you know?
Rigpa the Yore start to say what that chi Cardiana. Nazo chick no Shena Machina, Rigpa the Yores, and Rigpa the Jova Drogumendus, that young Ronda raised out to Lagurwas. And in Diang chick Tagua Davasa. And in Adi chick take it Tapa said, the Nazo Namun Tapa said, the Tambo Chala Chichin chick, you dig it on the Tamata, Germa Jorda, Chiketa di, the Tapa Kitcha Chagres. How many that chick they were shipping Nipo Rigpa and Sunny? You may Nika may tally draw the kitchen the young dos. In a morangi, and that top of our door started. Love the door.
Alelase. Ta kachin chegi tada dwala chi rigpa se de tani mongbu jade do sirala. Kachin ji rigpa se ne da tada dwa chidang de chidang danda chini chirong bu de nyamne chire khasirba. De ina da chi rigpa se de phagila chi de mubo ji ya ne de mo mo dong ba ji khile so ne pe ka le khom chare se zokchen nanglo la pe de yung ko mare se ko chulun ro ya re se na da da nga so na chi dang ne ndo ko she ko re che zokchen ko ne he de do de ina yang ne ge do du no ji de ka che rigpa se de yang mo mo dong ba ji ba ba ji khile so cha ni zong de de ni zokchen no ma za wa ni yung ko mare se de
So,
really,
and then Morangi chick the bird out chick that tembo chinning answer the chick or the penada chick semi Kari Sharni and D no then chick repay and bichani then chick tapa out chick or chick kong major out chick tapa yuding and out chick on draw they could do ask out they told the labudo. So Kiramshi is just answering basically whether you want to call it Rigpa or not. It's the question remains, or the point remains, because in this discussion, we're talking about, I understand that you're talking directly about your own practice, but here, if you were trying to say that Rigpa is permanent, then you're already saying that it exists as soon as you put that label on it. And as soon as you say it exists, then that means it's not empty. And if you say it's not empty, you're already far away from the view of Dzogchen. You're not talking about Rigpa anymore if you say that it exists and it's permanent. And so right now I'm trying to focus in on the, what this is talked about in the sutra tradition, but anyway, it's the same discussion anyway in this point. As soon as you try and ascribe a state of permanence or an ordinary phenomenal existence, then you're saying that thing now is no longer inherently or essentially empty. You're now saying that it is truly existing.
Yes, but there is still the point that Rigpa is always there. If Rigpa was impermanent, we couldn't have a realization. If it was like a mental state, impermanent and so on, you know what I mean?
Yes, but that tamita nikale depe ra chik takwa damba ra chik de chik sung de sare de.
That's it. Mara takwa re sila de gore.
Mara da takwa yo re cha chila kom be takwa chak son de ne kon de chik de nga so da chik sem shartse gi ngo ra chik de chag mare sa. But it's also not impermanent. That's the problem.
Ani tada di tari ale tambo da nge de chunong na di theka le jab go sirala.
Okay, so let me answer directly here.
아니 다다 디지 다처럼 배 죽chen 냠네 쟁이나 양 다텔지 딱바세 리파 딱바데 세나 데이세지 또 마데버리스데.
So, even as a Dzogchen practitioner, if you try to say that Rikpa is permanent, it's not very appropriate, not very convenient.
지 같이 코로나 나로라 답변은 저런 담보야 같이 레현이 참은 로고 그래봤어. 레현은 딱고때 이제 샘종돼서 참은 로고 그래봤어. 샘종로야 되니니 정때 저런 것 같이 뭐 동바이 뭐 내가 랑니 걸다 타지 차리서 봐. 다지 당드나 다다 가서 좋게 때 있냐면 쟁에 여여절에 되시라면도 다다 마히네 야게레스. 이나 다처럼 샘종 제드니 다처럼 자자자 타쳐 차리서디. 예 다다 가서 뭐 동바마도 지기다 될지 다마다니 그 바와리 파기 대등에도 매와 대가 랑니 코페디 고 혼로 코로노니 양데
And so, speaking from that perspective, like the practice of Dzogchen, from the very beginning, doing the distinguishing samsara from nirvana, doing Rushin, and all of the mental training that you do before you get into the main practice, you should have already come to an absolute conclusion about the nature of emptiness. And as soon as you're trying to say that it's permanent, you're already falling out of emptiness. You're falling into a framework of permanence versus impermanence. So, the essential nature of emptiness is you should already know that it's beyond the ideas of permanence, impermanence, and so forth. And so Mipam Rinpoche says that in order to come to a decisive, conviction about primordial purity, you have to perfect the view of prasangika madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy. So you have to have a perfect conviction about emptiness from the sutra perspective to understand primordial purity from the Dzogchen perspective.
I think you didn't understand my question. Because of my bad English.
No, I totally understand.
No. Maybe I didn't ask correctly things. Because, of course, I know all this. Because as soon as we are on the Dzogchen path, these kinds of questions are not relevant at all. We are beyond the conceptual level, of course. I don't try to establish in any way a permanent or impermanent,
Yeah.
It's completely stupid from a Dzogchen perspective. But I was talking more about the level of experience,
Yeah.
When you train to become stable in Rigpa, you know what I mean?
Yes.
There is this stability of Rigpa, of the Dharmakaya always present. I was talking about this, but maybe you didn't understand.
No, I understand. But the second you try and put it in words, you're already...
It's difficult to put in words.
Yeah, as soon as you put it into words, then you're associating ideas, and those ideas are already separating it from being what it really is.
Yes, of course.
Yes. 다디기 참아디 제기 수만당싱이 하고기유스. 다지 가서 렉바단 적전라 레비온드 데니치 따메타 데니치 가릴람네 안딜레 데바레사. 얘네양 가서 디 냠용다고 지 곰잭니 냠용다고 제기 용기 도와스 페는 가서 디 렉바 종주 찍디 찍 댄차 찍 톱고 도와사. 아니 디 이제 고 가디 얘네양 지 가리세고래. 가서 디찍 샤요나 찍 가리나 루요나 디 요르바 스타치 세그도알라.
나세.
다디 타니에 단다직 돈담라고 지란직 적전 타니기 남샤시르면도 이런데 직 타니기 직 사무당단라고 직 파 적전기 냠용고 돈이 개체라고 자그로.
나세. 오래 다디에다 돼서 드니 제당데 지금 드리 게르기 나솔체. 제디체나 야그레스. 상관이 되노나.
So if you want to follow up with that, we should talk about that privately. I think it's better not to get into this whole discussion, and particularly on that topic, and take up a lot of time for everyone else.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
다다 주롱 된다고 정도 되고 괜히 람 이야지네 파다 가스는 로네 아니 주롱데 가르레 동네데 가르레도 되네.
So like if we talked about this privately, I could talk about this exactly on the level that you're talking about. But right now we're speaking about a topic which is more for the public, and I can't speak openly about what you're trying to talk about.
Yes, excuse me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question about virtuous states of mind.
Uh-huh.
Virtuous states of mind from
Sure.
session 1.
Yes, yes.
I wonder if Rinpoche could talk a little bit more about the mind of restraint and ethical discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Just give some examples of that.
Okay, yeah. Ani kenam se nyama thambo ginana chegi che gewa gi che semjong ginala yan chik di che domsem daw chik sha na yambala di ani domsem di chotrem gi ngo yen sha chi song yamba ani digi pe ka shi chik sha na sa
알레라 세
che domsem se na khandri che go len go re sa
domsen sena da pena ngage 아 속교의 미 아니 그마고 미 세라바 아니 지 오래다 마진레 바세라바 아니 데나게 지 셈젤라데네 나바제게 미세 다 디기드네 다게 담자지 랭호라 델 domsen세.
And so the mind of restraint, you could also, in certain, the word for restraint in Tibetan is the same word of to take a vow. So in a certain sense, like if you were to take a vow, like the vows of the layperson's vows or the vows of refuge, the vows of a monastic, something like that, on a certain level, you're committing to restraining from some kind of behavior. For example, like Khen Rinpoche gave examples like, I have taken a vow, so in my mind, I have committed myself not to kill, not to take what's not given, meaning not to steal, not to lie, and so forth, not to harm others. So those are like mental states. I'm in my mind, I am committing to restraining myself or refraining from doing certain things. So, for example, when I first became a monk, right?
다 숙집이 리딩에게 되는 무슨 루당 나다 된들리 되는 게 바때니 무슨 숙집이 미세 다 샘게 돼야 좀 되라 그 양대 사들이 갖고 뭐 말이다 그 릉아는 바터니 다 무슨 계죠 말이 되는 미지시빙에 담자제나마도 다와디 용구요 말이.
And so from the very beginning when I became a monk, the first vow that I take is not to kill. And so, the vow is like a commitment in the mind. And so it's primarily actually as a monk, it's not to kill people. Actually, like literally, like that's what would break your vow and cause you to no longer be a monk. But essentially, I'm vowing not to do some action. Like I could kill with my body, for example. But I can't necessarily restrain my mind from not having some thought. I don't break my vow by potentially thinking that I want to kill someone or something like that. But for actually doing it, I'm vowing not to actually do anything. And then on the bodhisattva level, so the first is the vows of monasticism, or what we call individual liberation vows. On the second level, the bodhisattva level, then we not only, of course, commit to not doing the action itself, like killing, for example, but also even the intention. So we also take a vow not to ever even intend to harm others. And then we even also commit even further to do the opposite, to commit ourselves to protect others or help others. So that's what's meant by, mind of restraint or ethical discipline.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Renee, would you like to ask your question?
다리 콩들 렌지 저거 되면
So,
다리 지 들어가고 손직 때만 내가서
Oh, Renee, we can't hear you. It looks like your microphone is
아, 네,
unmuted, but we still can't hear you.
띵가면 제 인지기기한테 욕조 장에 들어와라.
아,
저긴데.
Maybe, Renee, we can come back to you? Unless-
You can't hear me.
Oh, now we can.
Oh, now we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. It's so delightful to be here with you. Thank you so much, both of you.
되게 제스키는 없이 페이지 붙여서.
Thank you.
My question is actually kind of adjacent, I think, to a question you've just answered, but I've had this burning question for some time regarding discernment and stability in the view.
Mhm.
And I'm just sort of continually frustrated by the apparent, let's say, post-meditative apparent return to faith in
Ordinary
the three
reality.
spheres. Yes, exactly. And then the doubt in experience of, let's say, sublimity.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just love to hear anything that you had to say about that.
Tanga ding ngamen
Thank you.
de treva de yosa. Tanga gi chik this tawa. Ta kari ki tawa yensar chi sumdo da chuni ki tawa de sen en degree de tongni ki tawa ra chi. Tanga de la pe thang che ki dosa. Kari re sana tanga de che gom ra chi jap. O chik tomba ki chu ra chi thong chuni ki chu ra chi thong. Ya lang de chik je top le an chik yanger de ni chik degar an zimba shoot do ya ra chi de la pe utu do dosa. Pe chik ngone yu da chik tawa ngana short do dosa. Wala. Gom jap de tes chik tong ni chu ra chik thong. Ya lang de degar an ngama nang shin thama ra chi cha do ya. Tawa de la do ya ra chi ta chik 아니 데 나데 체 카르차그레스나 잠잠 나랑 치 디냠레나 틱 태점 사야로 차그도사 야데 ngo네 틱다 직 춘이 데 ngo네 디 예나로 직 도바사기 요사 카이스나다 야 랑도 딜라로도 다와데
야야야야
우토도도사
알레라
칼리카보도 도사
디치랑 데마도사
Yeah, that's true. That happens.
다디 베데 코랑아서 디 셈데다 로가티라 라웅고요레스라라 나올라 냠버 야도디칼라 아니 조디 이그나피티가서 곰티포레 칸낭티지 호레스 주움바데 냠데 람송아서 왕보 공아 대쇼친로 요레스.
So one thing that happens is that when we arise out of our practice, we enter into a different level or a different way of perceiving. So like when we're practicing, we're focusing inwardly, and mainly the main kind of dominant part of our perception becomes our mental consciousness, you could say, our thinking mind or our mental consciousness. And when we get back up, our perception is dominated by our five senses.
아니 근데 손자디 그 톤을 뒤차대 되니 대배 담 팍파돼서 마도 지게 다다디 지탑 단냠야 지탑 냠된 랭인데 타팅 랭인데 산지 마도 요 말에 다 배데 그 냠지니 예매 찬롱인데 다 배데 산지 마도 요 말에.
And so it is only a Buddha who has the perfect inseparability of what they experience in meditative equipoise and in their non-meditation, like their day-to-day, life.
데지 저런 거 어떤 데지 탕치고야 요 말에 코베디 냠야라지 용되거나 냠야라 야다 아니 거지 지탑라 된다고지 용되기래스라.
But
타고 냠야데 저런 데서 고 템보도 야데 타고나 근데 지탑라다 다 된다고 용되기래서. 대레처럼 되지 샘트리라고 되게 고마레스다 때 탐나 데스 때 탐나야 오래데 때 미나지 센티스 고마레스.
So, but I think there's nothing to worry about there. It's like you just have to keep focusing in on your meditative sessions and it will start to influence your post-meditation. And if you're able to, start trying to apply the view, start trying to carry over the meditation into your day-to-day life. And even if you're not able to, just trust in your practice and don't get fatigued by it, and it will start to carry over.
다지 같이다 냠자라 곰디에 되게 치롱라 되니 펜토 데 랑게 리코르 마도 되니지 바 지타우 랑은 로 마타나 펜토 가야 매봤던데 말에세
라.
지 냠자라 곰디지 되게 치롱라 페여세난다 펜토세나 여레마도
라오.
다 되니 지타도 야 롱차데 나마나 이레 손두가라 다 냠자데야 지
펜토 say the money.
마토버데
Less. And so, even, if you're feeling like the meditation is like working while you're sitting, but it feels like it's not carrying over, it's not helping you in the post-meditation, that doesn't mean that it's not helpful to keep doing. So let me explain how this is still working, how this is still helping. So, from the Buddhist perspective, we believe that there will be a future life. And we also know that we will die at some point.
And 지금 시드 검도부터 발라 되니 디드거 그다 가서 다 띠길르데 파지 루사바츠 말을 버르드나 되니 바도세지 약이오레스.
And at the time of death, from the time after we die and before we take on a new form, there's a situation that we call the bardo.
디 바도 당부급 되나세다 당부 시드가 다다 가서 그지 샘라반데 르유와 마치 샘라바데 참만가 하고 그래스.
And in that first part of the bardo, the first moment after death, then we not only, become kind of separated, you could say, from our coarse body, but also all of our coarse mental states.
아니 대디 르다야tra 샘라바다 다다 가서 요디지 차장 드라드거 그더니 그 자차데 디디드는 나와지 요래 디 나와 당보텔라 되는 가서 디 다지 동닝이 나와지 용거 요래 디 다다 가서 호연이 공고로 왔어.
And so, at that point, we're not only separated from our body, we're separated from all coarse states of mind. And in that state, the first moment, or that first bardo, is an experience of emptiness. So to prepare ourselves to be able to see that or recognize that, we have to meditate on that before, while we're still alive. It's like right now, it's as if we know that we're going to have to go to war. We have to learn how to fight first. And so we've been talking about these kind of states of mind, that there is this coarse or afflictive kind of dualistic framework of mind, and then that there's something else there, like something else more pure, something there. And so we're not talking about something that's like some abstraction. It's something that you can actually experience. And so, we can, if we are able to recognize that appearance or that situation of emptiness in the bardo, we can become liberated from samsara in that moment of the bardo. But to do that, we have to be able to recognize that. So to do that, we have to practice in our ordinary life to be able to recognize that.
근데 송자다 직대 소라야 펜도 요레스 가세 대기 토라직 라소 마종나양 아니 가세 지마드니 양자다 다다직 오산다 오던데 샤지오레스 this all pen to your last about they take 10 minutes in the line, so she sent back a gang and get at this way. Go pen to yours, pen to me about 7 in the
And so that's one of our main like intentions as, you know, on the Buddhist path of practicing is to prepare for those situations after death, to be able to recognize those states in the bardo. And so, you know, even if we're not able to directly see the benefits right now, we still know that there's some benefit there. And even if we're not able to recognize that first bardo of emptiness, then there's another bardo with these other kind of experiential kind of appearances of luminosity. So there's another opportunity there. So anyway, this practice is still, you know, beneficial even if we don't see the immediate benefits. I think it's even helpful in starting to reduce like some of our problematic like senses of difficulty and frustration and those kind of things.
Yeah, and then this one that she does say the Kunga Sola and did in Yonkuore. Or that current channel do something like Yonkuore, and a deal of some Tangjo Mares. And in this, about Gangan at the Yonkuyo Marichita, take a pemba yachini. And then go Cassie, top the church in Rodena, and it did not degrees.
And so that happens to us too. It happens to all of us practitioners, you know, that like we start to feel like we're making progress in the session and then we come out and we're like, oh, what happened? And so that happens, but you know, it's we shouldn't sit around thinking about that as problematic and just actually take as our fundamental assumption that it's working, that it's benefiting us, it's helping us, and just keep moving forward with that assumption, like with that as our framework.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm particularly kind of stuck on this phenomenon that appears to be like doubt. I should say I do feel the benefit afterwards. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But I'm kind of stuck on this feeling, this post experiential doubt that the experience wasn't something I just made up, that I'm deluding myself about. Mm. Is that clear?
That like the experiences in your meditation are made up?
Yeah, like if there's, you know, a really sublime sort of wisdom feeling, or I don't want to articulate it too much, but I think you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. That then later I think, oh no, in other words, is it even necessary to discern? Is that doubt just an arising?
Pento the yopa de nge tsogi yosa. Da nge kare chik gadro dosa na. Nge chik pena da gom jap nyam rawa chik kari na chik shar. Pena da chik desel rawa chik kari na chik shar. Dene de jema de nge gom de ngondi digi yona mena nga ngone chik tawa rawa chik ngo she sona ma sona nga tagas dine chik or chik timo rawa chik gom ge yona rawa chik nga de chik sherap ki chik de ngone tawa de yemin rawa chik le chik ngarang na dopa gi yosa.
Oh, no, no, see.
And the nga za de tak chupo rawa chik khandri yongo resa.
And Tamarachi Topachi on Zido, Matonga,
Ta de dopa gi nga na tsu yon de te chik gadro dosa da chik nge chik de na drobi tu rawa chik khandri chik dopa sagin rawa chasong sa. And so what is your like level of practice? Are you a traditional like Buddhist practitioner? Have you taken refuge in Bodhisattva vows? Are you like on a path, or what are you doing?
I'm on a path. Mm-hmm. I have taken refuge. I'm kind of on a great perfection path.
Ta nga de chik chapdom de ta shunyo yus and nga de chik or lam na drode yus ta chik kardi na chik de zokchen chik drogi yus ta chik lab gido.
Ani che di che yo se. And di no da che di lamin nam je de zo zan de des che se. Lamin nam je de zan de des. Ji shok che wa ji. Re da tun 마송고 뭐도와 뭐네데 라미남제도 짠데 대시지 가세리디 흉치 모델이 제효사 어레 동부대 손나라.
So, first thing I would encourage you to do is if you're practicing great perfection things, I would encourage you before you start any meditation session to really focus on and really like try and develop or really focus in on your practice of Guru Yoga before you start a meditation session.
아니 디체 차드가 되발라더니 드니 다다코페 조동고 토라 간데 송빈 조동고 토라 탁 스파이야 아니 디 대랑게 코다 나서네 지 메이나 지마 사르자트 강바자고 한다고 드니 판로는 나 간데 차도도 예미 데라사만 마탕바지 공바지만 이지니 저런 봐 대건 조동 코라랑 될 파이야세.
And then, once you've done that and you're getting into like the actual meditation, just follow whatever instructions you were given for how to rest in that state or how to be in that state or sustain that state. Just keep doing it and don't doubt yourself. And when those thoughts come up or doubts come up, just look directly at those. And I think if you just keep moving in that direction, that will clear up that hesitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. 아니 다리디 콩들랑에 렌지 잡고다 제 뒤쪽에 나서면서.
Oh yeah. Wesley, did you clarify your question at all, or do you want to come back around to that?
You know, interestingly, I feel like Kempo has answered my question in the last couple questions.
Okay.
It is on this issue of like, you know, the personal practice, reconciling that with things that maybe come up in conventional reality. Like in my profession, I'm working with young people who have addiction or trauma and things of this nature. And so, and sometimes, you know, it's very similar to the last question, you know, the doubt will come up in the carrying over of my practice with what I'm myself even sometimes coping with and working with young people who have sometimes some severe afflictive states. And it's not like I can just, you know, start teaching the Dharma in the middle of public education or something. You know, it's not, it just doesn't work that way within the conventional system, right? So.
drugs la daw chi la jalan shoya tan den so la leke che gi yosa ani samsang konzo la pe shu chemo da dunga nyong chi ni ani nga de chi pa chi chu gi tone chi she dro ne an chi de o ji ting gi nang lo le an chi de wo pa yo ma res ji gi yo ma cho gi yo ma res da chi ani de la chi ngarang gi an de ni chi do pa sa gi yosa
ale continue le ka che ko sa re
la
ne pu de son thong ko re ine hienen de yo ma re
lao
da yo ma re la so de chu she ko ne de ko ma re se ane la se da de chirong se de muni de ma re de che on de ne chu dan jik de kaka ku re se da de na kyong chu dan jik de kaka ku re se de ji song ya sa do ga
ku se ne local
de loga re se da de kaka ku re se.
So there's a quote, it won't sound that interesting in English, but it's funny in Tibetan just the way it's said. But anyway, it says like, the Dharma world and the worldly world are different worlds, something like that, you know?
아니 데데 손다 다딜라
Or maybe I should say the Dharma perspective and the worldly perspective are different, something like that.
대송다 저런건 통농다 마기 부국은 통농인데 로가 차기 요레스.
So like your perspective on things and the way that the people you're working with are experiencing things are going to be different.
아니 지 산지가 가서를 마다디 통농데 간데스니 통그레세 줄라마 코롱 놀란데 히지 요레.
And so there's one explanation of what is the Buddha's perception of us. So there's an explanation of that in the Uttara Tantra as well.
아니 비다가 가서를 강한 용휘여바단 탑조 첨보다 베디 뉴라진데서 통크요레다 요 말레스.
So there's this question.
비다가 된 통나 아니 비다 센 다과세게 간데 야기 있어.
And so it's like the question or the doubt that is raised in the Uttara Tantra is if the Buddha perceives our difficulties and problems and afflictions, then how could you say that the Buddha's perception is pure if he's perceiving our impurity? That's a question in the Uttara Tantra, like a doubt that gets brought up.
아니 통크 매는데 탐진 쳔바레면 다스네 꼬발롱하나 차도다.
And if the Buddha doesn't see our afflictive states, then how can you call him the omniscient one? He's just, blind to our suffering or something like that.
아니 데라 레지 잡요레.
So there's an answer to that.
산지긴 통크어레스는 통크요레.
So does the Buddha see that? Yes, he sees it.
산지 랑의데 딱바레스.
But his own perception, his own perspective has been purified.
예 가스레 가서가다 다단 코와기 뉴다 생찬디 탐지 통크요레 이나야 산지레데 요고 말이스.
So just because he sees the fact that we are experiencing problems doesn't mean that that has infected him or afflicted him.
베 간데 야바레스는 나 예선 히빙은 히젠직 드나데.
So there's an example given. So let's say I'm a person who's sitting here and I have a clairvoyance. I can read other people's minds.
아니 람드나 메지고 니 코지네 다고 말라 독자슈 땅지 말라데야 세루마지.
And right in front of me, there's someone who's having a terrible nightmare and they're not waking up from it.
네게 파죽디게 강한 통크요레 이나 갈디 강한데 요 말다.
So I can see, because I can read his mind, I can see all the experiences, all the negativity that's happening, but I'm not experiencing negativity or harshness myself.
다 이나 네 탑시지 가르요르세디 파죽데 닉세약. 닉조야기다. 덴드기다 탑시요레.
But there's something I can do. What I can do is I can try and wake that person up.
데스만다 오레. 데 파주보데 닉조버 제발라양 탑다 데미고니 닉조야레 마도 다 찍베 효지 제야제 파주조롱을 펜토야레 뇌지어 차로레.
And so, but to do that properly, to wake that person up properly, you have to have the correct methods. Otherwise, you could just disturb them even more. If you yelled at them and pulled on their ear, you just piss them off. So, but you have to do this very skillfully. So it might start off with not actually giving them some like mental, emotional advice, but just helping them in an ordinary way in terms of their physical situation or whatever. And then slowly, as it may seem appropriate, you could start to give some kind of more, advice that might benefit their way of thinking or their perception, their mental kind of situation.
아니 디카드 발라지 다 탑데 다른 찍가래 요새 파주고 된다고 된 통도 나랑라 된다고 펜도 빼요래. 펜도 빼게 빼야나 간데 야고르시다. 나랑 다때 앞에 야나 간데 야고르다. 파주 그때는디 논초그 논로라 나랑 파츠로게 찍다. 그래발라 다 파기 되게 찍다. 다다처럼 지세도 다다 망보세도 하다 돼서 징에 히라미히데. 디노라 나랑야 파츠로게 찍다. 나랑라 라왕 탑니 팜 치바 마체 나랑라 양디 직 샘라 힝게라 소바 야진로와 마체 파듈라야 펜토 둥에지 람서 니요레스
Ngi go to maso kin.
아베네 체기디 nomprozo
Lao.
데코레라
Re.
다나 라마 메바지 체 조고지 나 체냠도 정도겠지
Lao.
체걸 파쇼노게
Lao.
체왕체로지
La so.
제가 다 되지자
Oh.
다 제니 체기디 nompro딩에 통니 다가 팜을 셔봐 마치 나랑라 닝게돼서 체 차네
Lao.
다한테 직대 고베데 랑바 노르고도 다데 야부 용사 말에 마음바 깔리 찬도서 서비 닝게돼서 야진도와 마치 마음바 체양이 람서를 칠라고야지 깔리지 다데 람 니요레스.
So when you come and encounter someone who's, on a wrong path, you could say, or up to no good, a couple things could happen there. You could either fall under their influence and just end up falling into whatever kind of problematic thing they're doing, whether that's, drugs or whatever kind of negative behavior or whatever kind of negative influence they could have. Or you could maintain your integrity, not fall under the power of what they're doing, but understand what they're doing and use that as a way of understanding them more and gaining more compassion for them. And by gaining more compassion for them, but not relinquishing them, not pushing them away, you will gradually be able to positively influence them because of your good connection.
안 된데 손다다 지 된다고 지다 제게 되네 소소라 대세 닝게돼서 공파 용야다 아니 갈리지 옛날에 탑람도 간데로 წერ고사리 돼서 탑람 몸보지 때문에 저 하고와 제니 아니 갈리지는 기민이 다다랑 펜투고야 되는 요 말이 토투고 말이스 갈리 아니 제gle 펜투 니라 펜투 토그래 다 저된다 돼 있으나.
And so, you can always take these situations as a way of increasing the power of your compassion and then continue trying to find or seek out or even gain for yourself more skills to be able to help others. It's not necessarily always going to be the case that you're going to be able to directly help them in the way that you might intend. It might be something that slowly comes about down the way. We may not even be capable. We might not have the power in ourselves to actually do those things right now.
No, listen, 제gle 돼 인사.
So that's what I have to say about that. My answer for that.
대긴 다리니 다 책이 들어와들 초소 도반 내내래 제소. 다직 다음에 세운데 같으나. 아니 다 파기는 거네 소소 지금 알고 지는 내가 제고 허다 날 빼샤 고고요래 날 내가 고고요래 날 고고요래 건지 대한테 멍치가다 지금 탑조에 급발을 된다 고지 레고요라 다 되게 강한지 나오면 다 고송다 돼 디콜랑에 저탕이 질랍야고사.
But I do want to address one more thing, about a bit more of your question. There was another bit which I thought maybe was also related, where you were saying there is this sense of there's this idea of selflessness, or that there is no self, and then on the other side of the worldly way is that you kind of have to fight for yourself, or people in the world feel like they have to fight for themselves, or they have to be assertive or even in competition with other people to try and get ahead. So there's that kind of maybe sense of a discrepancy or conflict there.
라세 데라야 당아소지 탑락다 제지 여데리 베네가랑게 나라코 지 나다 예비 진생게 다셔지 당알라 다지 요레스니 다지 레가지 적되나야 펜투 채와세 제 메비존다지레 레발라 알레오다 티야 간일라고노 다티 지코 소소게 지 다멘다고 진 통위기 되는 냠내 용해지 이나 영스르바 다지 대단 템비 처지 거니 다야 레가테서 쪼와지 제고그래 스르바 지나마 소진 소가 찍고 대 저교선바 첨반남지 리동래 대지의 소수군을 대 쪼와 제고그래 디 쪼와 제야 되게 가정 해바나 이 샘디 덱스 조르치니 이디 밤저르변 되게 다지 yendajila 펜토에지 땅아랑게 남은 나상대소 탐지라지 펜토에 yen다 참말 펜토에지 디그롱다고지 제 가세 톱톱지나 되니 디노는 만투베지 요마레스 와 인기미니가 다지 요 디드는 소고에 짱고야지 요마레스.
So I think that there's a way to work with this in that for example, anyone who is a lay person, a lay practitioner, meaning a non-monastic practitioner, we talk about as a lay bodhisattva, is still going to have to like sustain themselves. You still have to make a living, right? But what I talked about is that once you enter the bodhisattva path, it's not that you have to change what you're doing, but you change your perspective in how you're doing it or the motivation for doing it. So when you're making money to be able to help others, to be able to sustain yourself and others, to be able to support your family and be able to help others. And so it doesn't mean you have to like change what you're doing. There's just a shift in the perspective and how you're doing it. And in that, I don't think it really helps to like believe in a self. It's not believing in a self isn't helping you to do that. There's no benefit in like not having a self, or not believing in the self isn't going to negatively affect your capacity to make money or get ahead or provide or maintain the your sustenance or whatever.
De majibe che ma se che corni jablu la da tenda wole kali chogre te jima di sempe namte sola te khongre ta nga tambo zo gu samba da chireba so so pogo inanda jeme choga kari nai di mi sembi hika de ko jablu gumela temba na ji jima ko nalu la te khorundu ane nalu pe kale khaw pe chadu gres so so jima to ni ma ta be chireba khamba jegi nalu la tene kale khaw cha ro do was darang sama ta
Right.
ta yen che sa no ma ta ba che ta da singe ji nga singe ji ye sam ni ta nga ra zo che de na di kale khaw yong se che ta nang ni ka.
Where on the other side, if you are really fixated on yourself and your own benefit, your own needs, then that's going to cause problems. It's going to cause like bad relationships in your outer world, and you're also going to bring that in and negatively influence with your selfishness your whole family situation as well, if you're only thinking about trying to help yourself.
This one ta rang ji bu sa ma ta ya da yen la te sa ma ta ni te nguni chi ba yo res.
So there's a big difference between this kind of self-centered attitude of doing things and doing things with a perspective or from a perspective of wishing to benefit others.
Ta ina chi tang chi ta nam jun ta khoyo gu lo jung da ta ri nge he ji ni chi tang tan thu yo ma re.
But just in general, like the ordinary way that people learn to be in the world and what I'm talking about are not in harmony at all.
Te ina chi na ji ma ta da se ti ka re thab ya ba du so so la ka re ya ba yung ku do o ten de ta na.
But I think that's for each of you to investigate and see what works for you, or like what that might bring to you to think in that way. And that applies for all of you.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Mark. Could you talk a bit about the Samboka Kaya? How do we best train our minds in order to experience Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in their Samboka Kaya form?
Da de chuku de song soala. Da de longko de che te song nasa. Ani nga zo ge sem jong ne da che nga zo de sanje ge longko da che khandri je go re sta che se.
Na se. La se. Ahora ta te ang ge che te se che hie ya go de so ko che na te se pin ji ba na wo pe cha no yo re se la.
So I'll talk a bit about that. There are very extensive explanations of that in our text, but I'll talk about it a bit.
Te ni dan di ta ta ni hie de da jer tik pa chi mo da ju la ma ge kong ba ye ya ni.
So I am sticking with like the situation or the perspective of the Uttara Tantra text. So like I'm speaking from that basis, you could say. So everything we're talking about here is from the perspective of someone who's practicing in the Mahayana path. So a practitioner, meditator who is a bodhisattva. Or on the bodhisattva path.
로바치에 치데 델 펜타야다 디기 톨라 고 당보드니 주사 곤다지 데리아스다.
And so from the very beginning of their practice, they are doing that with the motivation to benefit and liberate all beings. That's like how they even got into, how you even enter into the Bodhisattva teachings is with that intention.
다데 예 야비케다 네 다리 예 야바게다 예 람데다 냠네 살람 드고다시 예 예바다 디 차차 디 통인도 호르바.
So all of these explanations of the practices of the path, the stages of accomplishment, and so forth are all taking place within the perspective of or on the foundation of that attitude or intention.
살람데 드니다 타말라다 치베 쫑이 다와나기고 딱 오니직 생기 연데 조제 매나마도 차차 zubi kapdena sanji se mentare madu di yen kan yo mares.
And so when you have transcended or gone through all of these stages of bodhisattva attainment and made it to the point where in the example you were at the full moon on the 15th of the lunar calendar and all the qualities of Buddhahood are completely manifest in that state, that's what we call attaining Buddhahood or being a Buddha. That is Buddha.
다지 샘지 랑이 마인 비게다 다당가서 로벌 바게다 끼견 그 차대서 다지 다파 상마 다파 찍다 다 방세고는다 다지 인절세는다 같이 가르치는 대탐지다 짠이다 마구바지 차려 왔을 때라.
And so that state is a state in which anything that is not the nature of mind, meaning all ordinary states of mind, all afflicted states of mind, are now gone. They're purified. They're abandoned. You could say they have been transmuted. At any rate, what we're saying is that that state of Buddhahood, that full moon, is not stained by or not afflicted by or not affected by those ordinary states of mind.
다 개잔도드네 쭌 근세 연대 근댕게 다디 춘이기 뭐 차버다 너드네 데리 죽겠으기야.
So that state of pure reality, which has had all of its faults removed and all qualities are perfect within it, is called Dharmakaya.
다 대두다 소소라다 연대인데 차 죽차디가라 다 마미게 다다디 지 샘지에다 가르는 제디지 대양다 그 여고라마도 다 리블럽자디 대 매바 차송나 되니 처음도 왔어.
And so at that point, you have all of these like qualities, perfected qualities of enlightenment. And that power, you could say, or that commitment of bodhicitta is still there. It didn't just disappear.
야. 대송단다 데니마 샘제 yenda라다 로다 간데 제게레서 다 디게잖아.
So now what happens here when you get to the state of a result is, okay, now we've attained this result, then how is there going to be some activity or benefit for beings coming out of that state?
공가수지 자급 신진지나 코난가 담자 제제디 당문이야 럽사디 디 리고다 단 리고문이 럽고다.
So like for example, when someone has finally been elected to the presidency, they finally have to come through with some of the things they promised when they were campaigning.
다 덴드 송장갈다 디 데네 이긴노 파상히 셈제레와 강제바 세니다 이긴게 노브나기 갑디 두갑게 되는 로든 제동다데 산지라 덴디게 되니 초다리 넘버 3니 겐들런데리 제군들런데리 제고세 덴디지 매바체 산지게 되는 톡게데 셈제 남제 되는 감다 매발라 되니 데다 덴다고 찍더니디 샤닌도 되제게레세 다 코랑랑다 시바데 데레스 줄라마
So then in the tzatzig dikari
이긴노 파상시 셈제레와 강제.
Okay. So then in the Uttara Tantra there's a quote that says that the Buddhas then will fulfill all desires or all wishes of beings just like a wish fulfilling jewel. Or there's another Yishin Norbo Pak Samshin. There are these examples in the sutras from like ancient India. So there's something called the wish-fulfilling jewel and the wish-granting tree. Anyway, it said that the Buddha's activity is like that. In that, they will grant the wishes of anyone. There's no bias of I will do this for you and not for you. and there's not even any thought. The Buddhists don't think I'm going to help this or that person, but it's spontaneous. So it is through the coming together of you could say the bodhicitta commitment of the Buddhas, together with whatever are the capacities and needs of students, then a Buddha or Buddha activity, you could say, will appear according to the need of whoever needs it.
다 델라치 다 이긴노 버싱에 다 띵상 데르다 오지 메르다 나미게지 로줄 덴데지 요스 델 마나타 운드 수세삼서 가려여바테 데는 드라운데세지 다 요리 띵상 띵가서 단 통기면도 왔어.
So we don't see anything like a wish-fulfilling jewel these days, but in these ancient histories they say that there was this jewel, and if you made some aspiration in front of it, it would grant whatever wish you made.
다 같이 노드스는 로던 덴데지 운드 아니 디단 로드 제발라다 조그나바지 땡지니 데단 로드 제고 요리에서.
But anyway, when the Buddhas need to do something, like do some kind of beneficial activity for beings, they have to have some kind of form that they can show.
다 조그나바 땡운데 대양 데니 샘제 소속의 샘게 니바카세 요요 대단 팀바지 땡 마도 아니 용구요 말이에서.
And when that form is shown or seen by a disciple, it can only be seen, or the Buddhas only show it, you could say, or the Buddhas or the beings only see it in accordance with what they're capable of seeing. So I think it might be easier to understand if I use myself as an example here. So let's say I attain Buddhahood. And today, when I'm giving some teachings, so you look up and see me, and you see me as a person, as a monk. I'm speaking a human language, aren't I? So similarly, the Buddha Shakyamuni, when he came to India and went to Bodh Gaya and attained enlightenment, he was in a human form, he spoke human language, he ate human food, and so forth.
아니 다 장초 선바야데 시진 토 사지기 통보지기 다운데 나 디더우지 말이 문더우 말이 에 코란 양지 밀린 디비게더니 딱 문이 고 장초 선바 코란 게다 나반다고 대양 딜리트니 딘 토비기 지 문이다 지 어글리세고난다 가리나 딘드기 나바지 남지니 양고 히에요레스.
And so that was like what an ordinary person would see, is like they would see a person, a monk. But if a bodhisattva, like a bodhisattva who has attained this direct vision of reality, saw me, they wouldn't just see an ordinary person. They would see something supreme, something superior, like a light body or something like that, you could say. And so, Lasso.
That day in the Nanjanima below something chena tan roa right to this nang yoris right to now the tendrola tendro koran na ya mato ya tendrola mesunda wo chik tendige nang yo mares.
Similarly, in the Nyingma tradition, when we talk about the way that these Buddha forms emanate or show themselves, they say that like Buddhas will show beings, like the beings of the 6 realms, in forms that accord to them. Like in the animal realm, Buddhas will appear as animals to help the animals, not as humans.
And
there are even stories in some of the sutras where the Buddhas emanated as other kinds of insects, and just the vibratory sound of their wings was heard by other insects, leading them to liberation. So they can appear as any kind of thing, like any kind of bird, wild animal, anything. And so that can appear anidi ngatul longku ki tanye di jarma swala.
Oh rela. 다 담보디 두고디.
Lasso. Okay, and so anyway, what I'm saying is that the Buddhas have to show some kind of form, something that can relate to beings, and that can be appearing as some kind of living being, sentient being, or even as a non-sentient being, like as a flower or an object of some sorts, or as any kind of animal or human or other kind of being. And so those kind of things are what we call nirmanakaya.
가르치되 나수기 대자마도 통무 탑자 그런 내가 랑때니 디소샤레스.
So because we can't see something beyond that, the Buddha looks like a person to us.
다 다리 대변에 다 롱주 줍고 써야 되는데. 장점선바 코로나 담보 람장진이 나서도 말에 다 나서배 곰장도 갈라 그 샘데마 간데 가세응어도 좋다고 들어봐. 대 저트데 대 점지 나와래 내다리 있다 치비다발 람지 배웠다 실랍송아. 대 나긴진이 장점선바 코레게디 디가 샘 코라운드라고 말에 대게디 나와된다고 말에. 대제운데 파기라 롱고 나와대야 대당 팀바지 나오지. 취양 된다고 통보직마 송야래 마도직이 양 제당 잠시 요 말이에요.
And so the bodhisattvas then, this is coming around to the discussion of Sambhogakaya to answer your question, is that it's just like the Sambhogakayas are what can be seen by a bodhisattva. And so bodhisattva's state of mind is not like ours. Like when we're trying to meditate on reality, like I said, it's still very conceptual, very abstract. We're not directly perceiving that. And then the bodhisattva is like, somewhere in that realm of directly seeing the moon all the way up to close to the full moon. And so their perception of reality is direct, and so what they see is something different than what we see. Are we going to perceive things differently than a bodhisattva who's having a direct experience of reality? So therefore, they're able to perceive a different kind of level, or more pure, you could say, level of perception of the Buddha. So they see the Sambhogakaya, they see the Buddha as Sambhogakaya. And even the Dharma that they hear, they understand or they hear on a more profound or a deeper level.
당에 도도츠 희에나 가래 추구생인데 되네 타토그 레버 되네 추니그 모래.
So to summarize, the Dharmakaya is the ultimate level of attainment, you could say. It's the actual nature of reality itself.
And when we
talk about Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya, we're talking about a way in which that can be perceived by, or that can appear to, beings who are trying to train in the path, you could say. But you can't actually say that they're three different things.
But
we have to make a distinction when we talk about the way that they appear. So there's an example given for this in the Uttara Tantra. So there's a moon in the sky, right? Appearing in the sky. And this water right here is just super dirty, really filthy, dirty water. And then we've got another pool of water over here that's somewhat more clean. This water is extremely pure and clear. The reflection of the moon in each of these cups of water or pools of water, it's all the reflection of the same moon, but there's a difference in how clearly it can be seen in the three different cups. And so that's only a distinction in the cups of water. It's not a distinction in the moon itself. And so that's and so then we then can talk about that, from three different ways that would be perceived. Three different ways enlightenment is perceived according to the abilities or the clarity of vision of the disciple, you could say. And so also not just what appears in terms of some kind of physical form, but even the dharma that they receive. So we talk about the teachings of the Nirmanakaya, teachings of Sambhogakaya, and teachings of Dharmakaya. We can even distinguish like 3 levels of teachings. And so to come back around to the example of me having attained enlightenment and then giving a teaching, that's going to appear in different ways according to whoever is receiving that. So that's less. And so even that just happens in general. I was just speaking about that in terms of like the way that the 3 kayas might be perceived by different people, like if I were Buddha and I were teaching. But even right now, in our teaching right now, the same situation is happening. I'm teaching one thing, but there's a diversity amongst all of you in your backgrounds, in your sharpness, in all kinds of different faculties that is making all of you receive the same thing. I'm teaching one thing, but you're receiving it in many different ways. So I think that is a great example right there for what I'm even talking about, like the situation that's happening with us right now. So for sure, 100%, that is the situation with the 3 kayas. Like that's how that situation evolves, or how we can discuss that in terms of the perception of disciples. So that was great that question came up, because then we could give a more full perspective on all 3 kayas. I was worried that if I talked too much about that before, I was going to bore you. But anyway, it was a good opportunity that we got to sum that up. Okay, so anyway, I think that was a good auspicious note to end on. We're now out of time. So, Ani? And so this particular teaching came about because there are quite a few people, I see quite a few of you here on the screen, who have been attending some teachings through the Namchak Foundation over the course of the last few years. And we've kind of been building up in our practice and the level of our practice to the point where this is a really necessary teaching for you to talk about Buddha nature. So Namchak asked me to teach about this, about the nature of mind and Buddha nature. And so, as a practitioner evolves in their practice, this is an indispensable topic to learn about Buddha nature and about the Uttara Tantra texts. So it turned out really great. I'm very happy that we were able to talk about that. And similarly, I know there are some of you who are at a very high level of practice who are here listening. Some of you who are total beginners. Some of you who are somewhere in the middle. And no matter where you are, I think that this Uttara Tantra text and the topic of Buddha nature is indispensable. It's absolutely necessary.
된데지 요래 양까지부터 저거는 벤 통보라고 지 야르고 이래 나 착천세네 된데 놀로 착천세 된데지 야르고 요래.
And so in our Nyingma tradition, we consider the Uttara Tantra text to be the text which bridges the gap between Sutra and Tantra. And in the Kagyu tradition, they consider it a very high level topic as well, and they call it the Sutra level of the Mahamudra teachings.
된데세는 다데 손단다 같이 가서 샘칸 나로를 칠로기니 띠세지 냠내지니 초안다 띠세지 연이 존데는 데히나야고 고지지요래. 띠짠이 메나 되는 데 고지에 깔려 가버리디. 띠다다 난디기도 나데서.
And so once you have turned your attention inwards, started practicing, and started gaining some kind of sense of the practice, some feeling of the practice, then this is extremely meaningful. If you've never tried that, if you've never practiced, I think it's a little bit hard to understand some of these points though.
근데 손자다 같이 노드나다 다리지 땜라데 배야 오지 좀 손세. 다 드레인티 갈다론 칩지레 되다.
No. And so anyway, I think that this teaching came about and ended quite with a great interdependence, a great auspiciousness. And also today is the 10th day of the lunar calendar, which for us is an important auspicious day.
근데 손자다 내게 지나발라더니 가세. ngene deso gata toya dang tendelten mana jabyongse.
And I will also include you in my aspiration prayers, like, aspiring that all of you come to realize this true nature.
La se tende somba kalata daba chinambateni tari dana senge cholayang ani togi chesida.
So thank you everyone for joining and listening.
So ani tata di reju la sobata leje cholayang de togi ches.
Thank you to Rachel and the other Namchak employees who helped organize.
Yeah. Ani ta Justin teni ta dwaji gebjusena anda shabchesena anda ta chamare dishas.
And then thanks to Justin, who's not only my translator, he's also my attendant, my helper, so he's doing everything here this weekend.
Lase ani ta tamjela thukji che ta talonga so namja ke ta di chude na talogu teni chudin ta tana chaswas.
Okay, so thank you very much. This teaching is also kind of concluding my yearly teaching cycle with Namchak. So this is a great ending.
Lase ente dan lenchi de ta kashi ya to che number 2 tende yang nge te sik theka to le yang jibya la te se ka nga yu ding na ya kashi ma go banda. And
so there's maybe some questions that I didn't get to, or some that I felt that I couldn't answer directly, so I apologize for that.
Okay, thank you.
And we're going to follow up with some study materials. I know that I mentioned that there's a free PDF of some pretty extensive teachings on the Uttara Tantra by Namchak Khen Rinpoche. There's also a really great video, another video of Khen Rinpoche teaching Buddha nature at the Buddha Garden a couple years ago. So we'll include links to all of these resources in a follow-up email that we'll send out to all of you sometime in the next couple days. All right, so we'll say a couple.
Khen Rinpoche's long one.
Yeah, we'll say Khen Rinpoche's long one.
Okay, I just put it in the chat for everyone. Om Swasti. Through the blessing power of the 3 jewels and 3 roots, you attain mastery of speech as the illuminating sun of exposition and are adorned with the 9 modes of virtue and excellence. May you live long and according to your aspiration, accomplish your twofold aim for the teachings and for beings.
And we'll say a dedication prayer as well. Sonam de tamche ziponya tomne nyebe dana pamche jinche ga na che wala truba yisipe tole dro ador sho jambo pau jitar jamba tan kundu zambo de ande shin de da kunge jesu dalo chi ke de da tamche ra tuzum chepe jawa tamche jingo ganla chodung apa de da ge gewe zawa de konjan zambo chuche ra dong wa ji.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin.
Lase.
Love you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Record.
아, 네, 공을 해당해 놓으시면서 West.
Wes.